You see the headlines. You see the calculator memes. 24 billion descendants. To the internet, it sounds like a joke, a caricature of a family obsessed with having babies. But when you are sitting in that living room on the floor of the big house, looking up at a whiteboard filled with exponential growth charts, it doesn't feel like a joke. It feels like a battle plan. I'm Jinger. You watched me grow up in a world where more was always the goal. More children, more influence, more power. My father, Jim Bob Duggar, didn't just want a big family. He wanted a legacy that would outlast nations. We were taught that we weren't just kids, we were arrows in a quiver, launched to conquer the culture. But arrows break, and soldiers get tired. Today, I'm going to take you inside the math. I'm going to explain the Quiverfull theology that turned our fertility into a weapon. We're going to run the numbers from 19 kids to a theoretical 24 billion. And I'm going to tell you why that plan is falling apart. This isn't just a story about overpopulation. It's a story about what happens when you treat human beings like numbers on a spreadsheet. To understand the math, you have to understand the metaphor. It all starts with Psalm 127. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior, are children born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. Most Christians read that and think, oh, children are a blessing. That's nice. My dad read that and saw a military strategy. An arrow isn't a pet. An arrow isn't a hobby. An arrow is a weapon. You launch it to hit a target. We were raised to believe that we were weapons of spiritual warfare. The world was seen as a dark, scary place that needed to be conquered for Christ. And how do you conquer it? You don't just convert people. That's too slow. You breed them. You create a literal army of believers who think exactly like you, vote exactly like you, and act exactly like you. The goal wasn't just a big, happy family. The goal was cultural domination through sheer biological force. If you have enough arrows, eventually you win the war. I remember the whiteboard. Dad loved charts. He loved business models. And one day, he applied that business logic to us. He would draw a stick figure. That was him. Then he would draw 19 little stick figures below him. Then he would say, now, imagine if each of you has 10 kids. He would draw lines branching out. The bottom of the board would get crowded. Then he'd say, and if they have 10 kids, by the time he got to the great grandkids, the numbers were in the thousands. His eyes would light up. He wasn't seeing diaper changes or tuition bills. He was seeing political power. He called it the power of exponential multiplication. He would tell us, if we stay faithful in 100 years, our family alone could change the course of America. It was intoxicating. As a kid, you feel special. You feel like you are part of a secret mission to save the world. You don't realize that you are just a number in a pyramid scheme. But my dad didn't invent this plan. He bought it. The architect of this entire mindset was a man named Bill Gothard. We went to his seminars every year. We memorized his wisdom booklets. Gothard taught that birth control was a sin, not just a bad idea. Rebellion against God. He taught that opening the womb was the ultimate act of faith. He sold this idea that if you just kept having children, God would magically provide for them. He ignored the reality of poverty. He ignored the health risks. He created a theology where a woman's worth was directly tied to her fertility. My dad took Gothard's teachings and turned them into the Duggar brand. We became the poster children for Gothard's ideology. When people watched 19 Kids and Counting, they thought they were watching a quirky family. In reality, they were watching an infomercial for Bill Gothard's cult. And the scariest part, it worked. Millions of people watched us and thought, maybe we should do that too. Day didn't think in terms of years. He thought in centuries. He had this concept of the 200-year plan. He believed that secular people who don't believe like we do, were having fewer kids. They were having one or two or none. So mathematically, they were dying out. He told us they are shrinking. We are growing. We just have to wait them out. It was a game of attrition. He believed that by the year 2100 or 2200, the vast majority of the population would be descendants of families like ours, simply because we were the only ones reproducing at this rate. That is where the 24 billion number comes from. It's a theoretical maximum if everyone follows the plan perfectly. Of course, it sounds crazy, but when you are isolated on a compound in Arkansas and your dad is showing you the math, it feels like destiny. He honestly believed he was building the new ruling class of America. But math doesn't bleed. Women do. The cost of this 200-year plan was paid by my mother's body. I love my mom. She is the sweetest, most gentle woman. But looking back now, I see how tired she was. Being pregnant for basically 20 years straight, that isn't natural. It is exhausting. Her body was the factory for Dad's empire. There were times when she was high risk. There were times when it was dangerous. But the rule was, you never say stop. You leave it up to God. In our world, saying I can't handle another baby was seen as a lack of faith. So she kept smiling. She kept that soft voice. She kept appearing on TV. But behind the scenes, she was worn out, and us older girls, we became the mothers. We raised the babies because mom was too busy having the next one. The plan required women to be vessels, not people. And that is the part that breaks my heart the most. People always asked, how does your mom handle 19 kids? The truth is, she didn't. We did. To keep the baby factory running, Dad implemented a military style system called jurisdictions. It wasn't just chores. It was a hierarchy. The house was divided into zones: kitchen, laundry, schoolroom, and the people were divided into teams. But the most crucial part was the buddy system. When a new baby was born, mom would care for them while they were nursing. But the moment they were weaned, they were handed to one of us older girls. I had my buddies. Jill had hers. Jessa had hers. We were responsible for their meals, their baths, their schooling, their discipline. We were essentially teen mothers. This system was brilliant for Dad's plan. It freed up mom to get pregnant again, and it trained us girls to be mothers before we even hit puberty. We weren't just sisters, we were deputy parents. The 24 billion plan only works if you have free labor to raise the next generation. You can't build an army if the soldiers start thinking for themselves. That's why our education was different. We didn't go to public school. We used the ATI curriculum, designed by Bill Gothard. It wasn't about math or science or history. It was about character and obedience. We learned the wisdom booklets. We learned how to be submissive. College was actively discouraged. Dad would say, why ein spend money on a degree that will just fill your head with liberal ideas? For the boys, the goal was to learn a trade, construction, car sales, so they could support a big family quickly. For the girls, our degree was learning to run a home. If you sent us to a university, we might learn about biology or sociology or women's rights. We might realize that having 19 kids isn't the only option. So the education system was designed to keep the world small, to make the big house feel like the entire universe. Here is where the math starts to crack. Dad loved the multiplication of people, but he ignored the multiplication of cost. It's easy to draw a chart where 19 kids have 10 kids each. That's 190 grandkids. But who feeds them? Who houses them? Dad made his money from real estate and the TV show, but that wealth doesn't trickle down infinitely. We are seeing it now. Many of my siblings are struggling. They don't have the TV money. They don't have the high paying careers because they didn't go to college. Yet they are trying to have big families because that's what they were told to do. You see them living in trailers or RVs or dependent on dad for handouts. The 24 billion plan requires billions of dollars to sustain. Without the TLC paycheck, the empire is just a lot of people fighting for limited resources. The plan wasn't sustainable. It was a financial bubble waiting to burst. The first time a Duggar couple decided to use birth control or even just wait, it was like an earthquake. We weren't supposed to talk about it, but we noticed. Hey, they've been married for 3 years and only have one baby. What's going on? In the outside world, that's normal. In our world, that was rebellion. Jill was one of the first to really step away from the pressure. Then others followed. Abby and John David seemed to be taking it slower. It was a silent protest. They didn't announce it. They just didn't get pregnant. That silence spoke volumes. It said, we love our kids, but Bill Gothard started, but we aren't going to be baby factories. That was the moment Jim Bob's calculator stopped working. He couldn't force fertility. The arrows were choosing not to fly. For me, the change happened when I met Jeremy and moved to LA. I remember walking down the street and seeing women living all kinds of lives. I realized that my value wasn't tied to a pregnancy test. Growing up, I had this deep subconscious fear that if I wasn't having babies, I was useless to God. I had to deconstruct that. It was painful when I had Felicity, and then Evangeline. I was so happy, but I was also tired. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think, maybe 2 is enough for now. Saying that out loud, it felt like freedom. I realized that I can honor God by being a present, healthy, happy mother to 2 girls rather than a stressed, exhausted mother to 20. I stepped off the conveyor belt. And do you know what? The world didn't end. God didn't strike me down. I found peace. And that peace is worth more than any legacy Dad tried to build. You can't talk about the Duggar legacy without talking about the rot at the center of it. Josh, he was the golden child, the firstborn, the prototype in Dad's 200-year plan. Josh was supposed to be the leader. He was supposed to go into politics, have a massive family, and lead the charge. But you know what happened. The molestation scandal, the Ashley Madison scandal, and finally, the federal prison sentence. It wasn't just a tragedy. It was a catastrophic failure of the entire Quiverfull model. We were told that if we followed the rules, if we didn't date, if we dressed modestly, if we obeyed, we would be protected from sin and Josh followed all the rules on the outside, but inside, he was a predator. His arrest didn't just cancel the show. It canceled the moral authority of the family. How can you preach about saving the culture when you can't even stop abuse in your own home? The multiplication stopped because the brand became toxic. The arrows weren't sharp, they were broken. With Josh gone and the older girls married off, eyes turned to the lost boys. Jason, James, Justin, Jackson, the middle brothers. Dad expected them to stay in Arkansas, work for him, and build the next generation. But look at what is happening. Justin got married and moved to Texas immediately. He got as far away as he could, as fast as he could. James is traveling Europe alone. No chaperone. Jason is posting things on social media that definitely wouldn't pass Dad's approval. They aren't launching a full-scale rebellion like Jill, but they are quiet quitting the family business. They saw what happened to Josh. They saw what happened to Jill. They realized that staying under Dad's umbrella means getting soaked. So they are finding loopholes. They are technically the family, but they are physically checking out. The army is deserting the barracks. It drives Dad crazy. But we have to talk about the Bates family. Gil and Kelly Jo Bates. They are the other mega family. They believe the same things we did. But look at them. Their kids are seemingly happier. They have better jobs. They didn't have the massive scandals. They rebranded. They made fundamentalism look cool and aesthetic on Instagram. Dad views them as competition. In the race to 24 billion, the Bates are winning. Their kids are reproducing, starting businesses, and staying relatively close. Why? Because Jill Bates realized something Jim Bob didn't. You have to loosen the leash. Dad gripped us so tight that we suffocated. The Bates let their kids breathe just enough to keep them in the fold. It proves that Dad's failure wasn't just the theology, it was his ego. He couldn't stand anyone else being the captain of the ship. I mentioned earlier that Dad wanted to change laws. He served in the Arkansas House of Representatives. He ran for Senate. But when his own career stalled, he tried to push Jedediah into office. Why? Because the ultimate goal of the Quiverfull movement isn't just a big Thanksgiving dinner. It's a voting block. If you have 100 grandkids and they all marry and have 100 grandkids, suddenly you control a precinct, then a district. They want to outlaw abortion, roll back LGBTQ rights, and enforce their version of biblical law. Dad didn't just want voters. He wanted politicians. He funded Jed's campaign. He put the machine behind him. But Jed lost. Why? because the name Duggar is no longer an asset. It's a liability. The voters rejected the brand. That loss was a massive blow to the 200-year plan. It showed that no matter how many kids you have, you can't force the world to vote for you. To make this plan work, to have 19 kids and keep order, you need absolute, unquestioning obedience. And that brings us to blanket training. It's a method from the Pearls, Michael and Debbie Pearl. You put a baby on a blanket. You put a toy just off the blanket. If the baby reaches for the toy, you hit them with a ruler or a rod. You train them to suppress their natural curiosity. You train them to fear the consequence more than they want the reward. We all went through it. And it worked. We were the most well-behaved kids in America. But at what cost? We learned to shut down our instincts. We learned that wanting something was dangerous. This training was essential for the 24 billion plan. You can't command an army of free thinkers. You need soldiers who jump when you say jump. But now, as adults, we are learning to step off the blanket. We are reaching for the toy, and we are realizing that the ruler isn't coming down anymore. The biggest threat to my father's 200-year plan wasn't the government. It was the internet. When we were kids, we were shielded. We didn't have smartphones. We didn't have social media. Dad controlled the flow of information. But you can't do that anymore. My younger siblings, the Gen Z Duggars, they have Instagram. They have TikTok. They see the world in real time. They see people criticizing the IBLP. They see documentaries like Shiny Happy People. They see that the evil world Dad warned us about actually has a lot of good, kind people in it. The isolation is gone. You can't brainwash a child who has access to Google. That is why the retention rate is dropping. The younger kids aren't buying the fear anymore because they can see the truth with a single swipe. The Quiverfull movement relies on silence. The internet is loud, and that noise is tearing the walls down. So what replaces the plan for Jill and me? It's about quality, not quantity. Dad wanted a battalion. We want a family. I look at my girls and I don't see arrows. I see little humans with their own thoughts, feelings, and dreams. I don't want to conquer the world through them. I want to show the world to them. Jill is sending her boys to public school so they can learn to think critically. I'm teaching my girls that they can be anything. Doctors, artists, engineers, or mothers. It's their choice. We are breaking the cycle of transactional love. Dad loved us because we were part of his count. We love our kids because they exist. That shift changes everything. It stops the exponential growth, sure, but it starts exponential healing. And honestly, a happy family of 4 is more powerful than a miserable army of thousands. I have to be honest about the cost of being number 6. When you are one of 19, you fight to be seen. You fight for a hug. You fight for a moment of eye contact. There is a deep loneliness that comes from being in a crowd that is supposed to be your family. We wore matching clothes. We had names starting with a J. We were a brand, a unit. But individuality was crushed. I remember feeling guilty for wanting to be me instead of Os. The 24 billion plan sounds impressive on paper, but it requires erasing the individual. It requires you to be a cog in a machine. And humans aren't cogs. The trauma of being overlooked, that takes years to unlearn. I don't want my daughters to ever feel like they have to compete for my attention. I want them to know they are the center of my world, not just a statistic in a census. So let's go back to the whiteboard one last time. Will there be 24 billion Duggars? No. The math fails because it assumes we are robots. It assumes every single child will stay in the cult. It assumes every single child will be fertile. It assumes no one will leave. But we are leaving. Jill left. I left. Others are drifting away. The exponential curve has flattened. Instead of a vertical line shooting up to the sky, it looks more like a tree branching out naturally. Some branches will have big families. Some will have small ones. Some will have none. The upland for world domination has turned into just a normal American family tree. And that terrifies Jim Bob because normal means he isn't a patriarch of a new civilization. He's just a grandpa. The math was a fantasy. The reality is messy, beautiful, and uncontrollable. I used to be afraid that I was ruining my legacy by walking away. I thought I was failing God. But now I know that true legacy isn't about how many people share your last name. It's about how many people's lives you touch with kindness, truth, and love. My legacy isn't Jinger Duggar, the reality star. My legacy is breaking the chains of fear for my daughters. My legacy is standing here, using my voice. The voice I was told to keep silent, to tell the truth. Jim Bob Duggar wanted 24 billion descendants to blindly follow him. Instead, he got something better. He got strong, independent women who are brave enough to chart their own course. We aren't arrows anymore. We are the bow, and we are aiming for freedom. I'm Jinger Violo. And this is the real math of the Duggar family. Thanks for listening.